the Fireside chat on energy efficient decarbonization of process heat, technological opportunities, and the political framework. This is a Fireside chat, an event which is sponsored by the European Climate Foundation, by the European Heat Pump Association, and by DENEFF, which is the German Association for Energy Efficient Businesses. My name is Stefan Scheuer. I'm a consultant coming from Brussels, working on EU policies for the last 25 years, and I'm supporting energy efficient decarbonization process policies in Brussels. So what are we doing today at our Fireside chat is without a fire, having a chat.
Whiskey, so you got the right.
But I have the whiskey behind me, which is already produced in a sustainable way. So maybe later, or when we are later still around on the Anuga Food Tech, we will get a drink. Now, setting the scene, we have come from a quite long marathon of policy making in Brussels, which is dealing with climate change, trying to get the European Union on a path towards net zero emissions by 2050 and setting and achieving clear targets by 2030, the 55% reduction target. So Fit for 55 was the name. It was part and is part of the European Green Deal, which is the European Union response to what young people 5 years ago brought to the streets, their concerns about climate change, about their future. We have maybe heard a bit less about the youth in the recent months last year, but nevertheless, the topic has become even more urgent, last but not least, because the Ukraine has been invaded unprovoked and aggressive by one of our most important fossil fuel suppliers. So the security question remains high on the agenda and therefore the need to step out of fossil fuels. We have many policies now, new policies, which we all have to learn how to work with them. This is new carbon pricing covering essentially all sectors now, a social climate fund to make sure everybody is on board, energy efficiency targets, which is a pet topic of myself. Then we have also with the cars, mobility sector, major steps on stepping out of the combustion engines in cars. We have also new targets and performance standards for buildings, which is about to be concluded. So pretty far-reaching and important steps the European Union has taken. But now at our Fireside chat, we want to explore a topic which hasn't received so much attention yet. So I'm here with Dr. Tatjana Ruhl from DENEFF. She's leading the industrial decarbonization and she's an energy policy expert. And I'm with Thomas Nowak, who is who's the Secretary General of the European Heat Pump Association for now nearly 2 decades. So with both, we will be discussing an area which I said has been sort of left aside a little bit, which is the fossil fuel use in industrial heat, process heat, a sector which I said has received little attention so far. So we will go as a fireside chat through different themes, taking our time. We have got nearly 1 hour left. So maybe just to kick off, I invite Tatjana that you briefly say who you are and how you come here and how you got to process heat.
Yes, thank you. So you already introduced me. So I'm Tatjana Ruhl. I'm at DENEFF, German Association for Energy Efficiency, and I'm leading the industry team. So I'm responsible more or less to help the German industry to become energy efficient and to get on their path to climate neutrality. According to the topic we're talking about today, decarbonizing process heat in an efficient way. So the question is, why is this an energy efficiency topic? You'd say on first glance, this should be rather about renewable energy, about heat production, how is this an energy efficiency topic? And it's an energy efficiency topic in two ways. So on one side, you see that in process heat, in the end energy use, you can save 30% of end energy in industry only by getting the end energy efficiency potentials on the street. So you have to get your excess heat demand, you get your excess heat down, you have to use your excess heat. You have to think about the right temperature level, so all of the end energy efficiency things, so traditional ones. And you actually could save 30% of end energy in industry just by tackling these economic potentials in end energy efficiency in process heat.
Great.
So this is a very big energy efficiency and rather a traditional energy efficiency topic then. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, we know that if we want to become climate neutral, so I've got the German numbers because I'm working on for the German market, we have to reduce energy demand as a whole for the whole economy, all sectors, not only industry, but also buildings and transport and so on. And in 2045, we only have half of the primary energy that we had today. So the question is, then how can we provide for this reduction in primary energy needs? And on the other hand, how can we decarbonize the other half that we already that we will need also in 2045? And yeah, this is the question where process heat in the question how process heat is produced comes into place. So you can take renewable energy, electricity in the first place, and use it directly, or you can transform it to hydrogen and use it then. And obviously you have conversion losses, mm-hmm. and this is the other reason why this is an energy efficiency topic.
Very clear, thank you very much. So a huge economic savings potential and an important player therefore to get us towards the 2050 climate objectives. Now moving to Thomas Nowak. Why are you here at the Anuga Food Tech? You are providing heat pumps. What's their role?
Yes, I'm not personally providing heat pumps.
I know,
but I am representing the industry, and it has taken us about 10 years in Brussels to establish this idea of industrial heat pumps. In the beginning, we looked at renewables, energy efficiency. So what you said, Tatjana, how do we frame the question? CO2 emission savings, and mainly for residential units. And in about 2014, it was for the first time that I met somebody that said, we are doing industrial heat pumps. And even for me, that was new. And it was new. At that time, an industrial heat pump was something that could do maybe 100 degrees. And we learned over time that in these industrial processes, there's huge potential in reducing the fossil fuel intake. And I think that's what's the important part of this. Can we reduce the fossil fuel demand in industrial processes? Can we replace it either with recovered energy from the very industrial process, or can we put in renewable energy as a new source of energy? So you could say, is it really an energy efficiency, or is it just an energy efficiency of renewable and waste heat? Because it may sometimes even be that you increase the energy demand, just you don't pay for it anymore because it comes from the existing process or it comes from renewables. Why am I here? For us, the food sector very quickly crystallized as this sector that has all these processes that are in ranges up to 200, maybe 250 degrees centigrade. And it still is a huge surprise to many players when you tell them that a heat pump is not only there to heat your hot water in your house or cool your apartment, heating and cooling, or heat it, but you can also do industrial heat at a megawatt scale. And that's, of course, it's a combination. We can do high temperature and we can do high capacity. And when you walk around here, you see that the interest of the visitors is more about how do I press my cheese, how do I crumble my meat, all these things. And energy is not so important. But for the users of these machines, eventually they will have to pay, and they will have to comply with sustainability requirements, and they will have to comply with achieving the targets. And by the way, von der Leyen, the president, she just announced that we want to go to 90% by 2040. So the ambition level is actually even going up. And if we want to put some numbers to it, then we know that Europe roughly has 13,000 terawatt hours of energy demand. About 1/4 goes to industry, and 2/3 of that, so around 2,000 terawatt hours, is heat below 200 degrees centigrade. And is heat. And then again, 40% of that, some people say even 50% of that, is heat at the temperature level of up to 200 degrees. So we can safely say all this heat can simply be decarbonized. We can get rid of emissions with heat pumps with today's technologies even. And that's the interesting part. We can, if we electrify, and if we electrify efficiently, then we can decarbonize this whole sector. And that's why I'm here.
Thank you very much. Now, following up on that, trying to understand why we're only now talking about it. Because heat pumps at homes, I think we're all getting familiar with it. There has been massive development in the public conversation, in the support schemes, in the technologies. So why is it that in this sense, the small scale, the consumers are leading rather than the industry? Why did it take so long to emerge as such an important and big topic?
There's a few reasons. I think one is really the technology has made huge leaps in the past 5 to 10 years. So it's really, we are now at a stage where we can say we can provide the solutions that the industry needs without having them to become experimenters and first movers. You can really say, if you have, for example, a whiskey distillery, now we can say we have the first whiskey distillery that is running on heat pumps. You're not the first anymore. Pasta, we have the first pasta, there's many more. If we talk about chocolate production, we have many examples. So if somebody doesn't want to be the first mover, now they have enough examples so that they can trust that this will work. And the process engineers, they are very, very careful in letting anybody touch their processes. So there's a lot of hesitation to try something that hasn't been tried before. But then there's the economics. Electricity is still expensive and gas is cheap. So the war that you mentioned has led to a very, very big peak in gas prices. So a lot of people out of a sudden thought, this could come back again. And then we have also a CO2 price that's coming. So the bit more forward-looking people, they say the times of cheap gas are probably over. So we better change so that we are resilient against future modifications. And maybe as a third part, there is really an increasing discussion around sustainability, around fact-based, science-based targets. So we want to go into a less energy-intensive world, in a less energy-intensive industry that is using less CO2 emissions, and that's also playing an important role. And maybe 3A, the water aspect. We have less and less water, and I just recently learned that if you deploy big heat pumps, you save the cooling towers. And the cooling towers, you could say they are wasting water into the environment, into the atmosphere, that you have to get. You have to have a permit, so that's complicated. So the factory providers, they say, if we can get away with less water requirements, that's actually quite a convincing aspect of the whole equation.
Yeah.
Right, so basically all things are coming together. We have technology progress, the economic outlook and security question, pushes in the right direction. Yeah. And at the end, we have the whole question of resource efficiency. Last question on that point before we move away from heat pumps is when I was checking at my house, how can I run a heat pump? The test they told me I have to do is, can you run your house on 55 or 50 degrees?
Yeah, 55.
Now, you're telling me 100 degrees is no problem. So
and it's a different type of investment, of course. It's a completely different type of investment. But
so how do I have to imagine this heat pump? How different does it look? I mean, it looks a question just of size.
It will fit this space. So you can use a steam producing heat pump will fit our, what is this, 25 square meters, I guess, and then it's a bit higher, so maybe 3 meters high. And you could put it in your house if you want. You could, you know, the skyscrapers.
And the whiskey cellar has to go.
Yeah, they will make a second one for you.
All right.
But the skyscrapers in New York are heated by steam. I mean, and that's the big silver bullet here. Can we replace steam in industry? And you mentioned 55 degrees. I discussed it with Tatjana beforehand. It's really an interesting question at which temperature level an industrial process has to operate. By reflex, a lot of the industry is running on steam. So if we come to them and we say, well, maybe, you know, you don't need that steam anymore. They say, out of my office, you know, you're not touching my process. But you have the same experience, right? So it's really the interesting question.
Yeah, I can only support what you said. And it's more or less the same on the German market, but as Germany is still always a bit different than the whole of the European market, I would like to highlight some of the aspects and add some more. So we really saw a rising interest in industry to decarbonize their process heat when the war in Ukraine started and energy prices soared. Up to this point, especially in Germany, we had very cheap fossil gas, and fossil gas is still the main energy source for process heat in Germany. So about three quarters, 75% is still fossil gas. Then at the same time, many companies understood that there is a real climate transformation that they will have to take. And they started to think about how can we do this? And they started planning. And they quickly saw a very big part of our CO2 emissions is because of process heat. Actually, if you're not a steel company or cement or the like, process heat is the very big CO2 topic in your company. And that is why in those decarbonization plans companies are preparing right now, process heat is in the center. And then, of course, they were thinking about how can we substitute fossil gas in our processes. And this was not made so easy for companies in the last few years because they had hydrogen here and hydrogen there. But obviously, this is, first of all, not the only solution, and first of all, not the cheapest solution, and it's thirdly not the best available solution, because where can you buy hydrogen now or in 2 or 3 or 5 years and make your company process heat decarbonized? And this is why companies are thinking more about electrifying their process heat. And heat pumps are one possibility, one technical possibility among others, and one that is very energy efficient. So if you have the technical setup that allows for a heat pump, then you should probably go for it because, you save energy and you save money.
Right.
But there are also companies who can't do that or who won't do that for some good reasons. And then there are also other good technological options.
So what other options are there?
For example, there are electric boilers. There you have 1 kilowatt hour electricity to 1 kilowatt hour heat, more or less. And with heat pumps in industry, you can get 2 or 3 kilowatt hours heat out of 1 kilowatt hour of electricity.
4 or 5.
Or 5, depending on the temperature level you want to reach. Yeah. But on average, studies say 2 to 3 times as much as you put in. And this is obviously a very big chance for energy efficiency.
Yeah. So what is your explanation now that we have been so busy in designing policies and putting support and laws and everything in place, and that whole topic never popped up? Was it just really not the time yet, and do we need to go for it now?
I think it has happened all the time. The industry has developed.
Okay.
We would not have seen this development if there would not have been a few people and a few industries that have pushed this further and forward. So the fact that it didn't really find its place in policy did not stop the technology from developing. And by the way, we do have it in the Energy Efficiency Directive. So that was always the space for big heat pumps, because the big heat pumps often also really use the recovered energy from the process. So they don't fall in the renewables part of residential heating. And that the policymakers sometimes really understood that. And they said, okay, then we just have two recognitions, because if you look at the different precautions in the Energy Efficiency Directive, which you know very well, then they have always said industry is put there. And it's only now that we have also in the Renewables Directive a recognition, and the very specific recognition now that says we should decarbonize heating demand in industry up to 200 degrees completely. It was even worded a bit more demanding in the first versions, but then it was watered down a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay. But I want to add one point, because it's this idea of electrification gives us basically three solutions. We can use the heat pump, which is most efficient, but then for higher temperatures we have vapor steam, mechanical vapor recompression, so steam recompression if you need really high temperatures, and then we have direct electrification. And with these three technologies, there was a very good study out by the Potsdam Institute for Climate Research, and they say that with these three technologies we can, with given technologies, decarbonize the total energy demand. So we don't even need to wait anymore. And maybe that's the reason that the technology is ready. So now we don't need to recognize it in legislation, but we need to shape the economic framework so that you not only save energy and CO2 emissions, but you also save money, because that's then most important for the industry to say, can I save money on my energy demand?
Good. So if we move from there and draw the parallel to other areas, so we have the space heating area with renewables, heat pumps, and all the solutions there to decarbonize. As I understand, mostly cost-effective, economic, makes sense. So basically, anybody who doesn't do it is wasting money. The same is now becoming true for electric vehicles. So all the policies was just about getting us over the non-economic barriers. So the lack of financing, lack of information, lack of infrastructure, etc., etc. Now here I understand we have got a problem still with the economics, that it doesn't pay. So
changing.
Is that changing? So where are we on that?
It depends on where you're looking at.
Yeah.
If you look at the energy efficiency potentials I mentioned in the beginning, the end energy efficiency potentials, so recovering excess heat, for example, this is already economic, but it takes its time. So payback periods may be 5 years, 6 years, 8 years, but it's economic. And there are big economic potentials, as I mentioned. For electrifying or decarbonizing process heat, quite a lot of solutions are not economic yet. And this is depending mainly on the ratio between the fossil fuel prices and electricity prices. And obviously technologies which don't need as much electricity as others to get the process heat out in the end have an advantage. So the idea that comes up very quickly is to say we have to make electricity cheap. As a person working in energy efficiency, this is not the first thing I would think about. Because if you just make it cheaper, just say this is cheap electricity, then obviously all the other solutions where you need electricity will start wasting it. Because prices play a major role whether you go for an efficient solution or not. So if we talk about price instruments, then it will have to be targeted ones. And I think we are still in a very early phase of designing the right policy instruments without getting out results that we don't want to see in the whole picture of energy and climate transformation. So I think we should not move too quickly with just say cheap electricity and then it will all work. So it's about a price ratio. We don't have to agree whatever we think.
Oh no!
So instead of cheap electricity, you're saying expensive gas. Or I don't know. Would you agree with that?
I would say you're right, and you're not, because obviously what we have is that industry says, and maybe one step back, we are looking at a very wasteful energy system in industry, and it is wasteful because gas is cheap. So that's the precondition of our whole discussion here.
Yeah.
Cheap gas destroys the economics of a heat pump or of any type of electrification. And so if we say here on the podium that the heat pump is too expensive, it's only too expensive in the comparison of the cheap gas option. If you would figure in the CO2, the external cost of CO2 into gas, the whole discussion would be over. And then I'm with you. Then I would say, okay, then we do not want cheap electricity just for the sake of cheap electricity. We want this ratio, and I think that's what you were hinting at also, that we want this ratio to be positive. The ratio needs to be 2, for example. So if you divide the price for electricity, industrial electricity in this case, via the price of industrial gas, it should not be more than 2, because then the cost of the heat pump becomes an investment for the company. And then they will do it. There's this old joke. They say if the return on investment is less than a year, you're fired because you didn't do it. Yeah? So you're not saving the company money. If it's between 2 and 3 years, then, well, we start to consider it. If it's more than 4 years, we'll never do it. And there's another aspect in this. Cost is one, but we need resources to execute these projects. And I talked to quite a few people that said we could not invest in the heat pump because the return on investment of different projects that we had at our disposal was okay for process optimization, maybe a new machine, for example, or a new production line. And then the heat pump came only with an IRR at the stage, to position 4 or 5. But we have only enough people to run 3 optimization projects per year. It's not done by saying, oh, I take an external service provider, I tell them optimize my production, and then you go on holidays and come back and everything is done. You need your own team that accompanies that. And so there's not enough people for that. That's what I have heard.
I also want to add, it's not only about making the whole thing an economic decision. So we know from traditional and energy efficiency potentials that it is just not enough if you have an economic opportunity. People will not always realize their economic potentials. Because of too long payback periods, but also sometimes it's the ones with small payback periods that are also not realized. So there has to be something else. And especially in the case we are looking here at is that for the companies, it's a long-term and more or less risky decision which technological path they choose. Because they can decide now to electrify their process heat. They can say, I'm waiting for hydrogen, or they say, I don't care at all, I do with fossil fuels and have CCS when it is available. This is the 3 basic options that companies are considering. Of course, there's also biomass and so on, but this is not widely available. It's just not enough for everyone. I think this is the main thing politics has to deliver, is the security which of these pathways will be a good decision. Which infrastructure I will have the electricity at my premises, will I get hydrogen to my premises, will there be CCS? How much will this cost in the long run? Companies can just not really decide if they are taking a good decision now. And this is something politics has to deliver. And if you take the numbers, then obviously the electrification part should be the cheapest in the long run, but it is dependent on the regulatory framework.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so but now, because what you're saying is that the policy signal is not good enough.
No.
Which is, of course, astonishing, given that we have seen the biggest ever push in Europe to have clear policy about decarbonization. So something has gone wrong there. I mean,
but this is all decarbonization options. But this openness for technologies, it's a good thing on one hand, but on the other hand, if it's dependent on infrastructure.
Agreed. So we get to the examples we have now, and I want to see how you react to these parallels. We have the cars, where basically the EU has set a standard, which means that by 2035, the internal combustion engine cannot be put to the market. It's directly a ban. Now, that is very clear. I think the signal was and is strong. But of course, it can become blurry because we have politicians who might, during elections and campaigns now, try to say we're going to reverse that. So that is a risk we're always living with. Now, the other one we have is with, and that is coming to the heat pumps and buildings, is a very strong push to decarbonize residential and non-residential buildings, and do that through regulation, through setting standards, and particularly through tackling the technology which you can put in, i.e. if it's based on a certain renewable share or emission limit values, etc., you would always get to these technologies as well. So we have these examples which seem to be very strong in their signal function, but we don't have them actually for the industrial process heat. So is that something you would say we need? We need a dedicated policy at national, at EU level to make sure all the industrial process heat industries, they get the clear signal.
I would not see it so skeptical as Tatjana. I think the options are not as various as you say. I encounter very few people that think that hydrogen is really an option. And quite a prominent figure, Michael Lieberich, he says the hard-to-abate sectors have simply disappeared. Certainly for the likes of this fair, there is no hard-to-abate sector anymore. So this temperature level up to 200 degrees can easily be covered by electrification. Nobody needs to wait for hydrogen. And when you say there is not enough biomass, for sure there is not enough clean hydrogen because there's none de facto. It's not there. So if somebody tells policymakers, let's keep that an open option, it's just greenwashing a discussion. And I think there we need clarity. We need technology clarity that says, okay, guys, the future in certain areas will be electrified at large. CCS is the same, by the way. There is not a single functioning CCS plant at the moment that produces volume.
I totally agree. But the thing is that companies really consider
Yeah, but then it's exactly, then one conclusion could be we need this technology clarity. We need policymakers that dare to say, hey, electrification gives us the fastest decarbonization option. And by the way, when we really mean energy efficiency first, and you and me were there in Brussels when Cañete said it for the first time from the stage, that if we mean energy efficiency first, it means electrification first. Everywhere where we can electrify, we should electrify. And then if we have other uses, areas where this doesn't work, or let's say, I mean, I don't want to exclude direct geothermal users, or you have a solar thermal plant that can help you for hot water storage, for example. You know, let's not be dogmatic, but there is at least, by and large, electrification first should be the mantra of policy making if we want to go fast.
So you would go for the example of cars as following that pathway?
You could really take a very similar approach and say we will limit the CO2 emission per kilowatt hour of thermal energy, and you bring it down to what, 50 grams per kilowatt hour. And if you can't deliver, then you can't have the process.
Would you agree?
So I think it would be certainly a good idea to have some rules for new applications. So if you have for new plants, if you have a new installation, obviously it's a very, very bad idea to make it fossil fuel based.
Yeah.
But this is still an option, and it's not regulated. And this, is obviously a topic for policymaking.
But one thing, I mean, wouldn't we also ask for a less intrusive state? So I'm still a bigger fan of saying we will have a CO2 price, and the emissions of industry are governed a lot by the cap that the legislator puts on the CO2 amounts that are allowed in industry. So you could go via that route and say, let's just make these reduction pathways strict, and let's make it even maybe a bit stricter for industry. You can have subsector targets because we know that it's easier to do.
Yes,
but
indeed.
Are you talking about new installations or about decarbonizing existing?
In principle, I talk about everything because if the CO2 price goes up, it doesn't matter if you build new or you operate an old machine. You will have to face the market realities of competition. And maybe it's getting a bit complicated, but we should look into CBAM. So what happens with the carbon content of imported products, but then we have a different discussion. But if we focus on the market reality and we say we want to make it attractive to electrify, then of course we need to look at this ratio. Then the second thing is the grid, because if you build a 10 megawatt heat pump, you need quite a powerful connection line. So we need to have I like this term anticipatory investments into the grid. We should look at how does a fully electrified society look like in 2050, and whenever you open the ground or you change a substation, you have to keep that in mind and update the distribution grid so that it's ready for the future that we envision.
I saw a very interesting initiative of the German government in this regard, and I was very happy about this because they started joint planning, joint grid planning, and not only ask companies, do you need hydrogen at one point of time, but they also started asking, will you sometime in the future need more electricity at your premises? And so as a company, you don't have to gamble and put high numbers here and there so that in the end you can have everything. So you can put your real demand into the planning
Very
procedure.
good point that you mentioned that, and that should actually be replicated in other countries too. This is a very good policy tool.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's interesting because infrastructure is of course a very important policy, public policy making for national but also EU level, the whatever trans-European networks, which always give a very strong signal here as well. But now talking about infrastructure, the big picture, we need at a certain moment to come to maybe food and beverages and the sector we are here. Which when I came here, I was more thinking of, bakeries, That's where I meet the food sector most probably, and I see the oven. It appears to me rather, small scale SME-like, very well spread, dispersed. So how are we getting there, and what is the take on this? What's special about the sector?
What do we need? We need heating and cooling typically. When you have the pasta example here behind you, so you have to grind you have the flour, you make the paste, you dry it again, and then you want to pack it in a hygienic way, and I guess you will also cool it at least at slightly above ambient temperature or below ambient temperature. So all of this is something where a heat pump can play an important role because you have continuous cooling demand. The cooling demand produces waste heat. If you can bring the waste heat to the beginning of the process, then you close the energy cycle. You could even say maybe it's a bit boring because a lot of these processes are even below 100 degrees, and that we know for a long time. So we could indeed ask ourselves, why is that not the dominant technology already? But it's coming now, and I think really it's a change process. It's a change process in society, and decision makers need to get acquainted. They need to become friends with the new technology. As much as they trust steam today, they need to trust that this heat pump that closes the energy cycle is actually a reliable technology.
Yeah.
So we need promotion, maybe less
we need
infrastructure.
DENEFF, for example.
Yeah, we need DENEFF.
And you?
We have DENEFF.
Food and beverages industries are quite experienced in energy efficiency because it's an industry with a high energy demand. Mm-hmm. As you said, heating, cooling, And the temperature levels. This is just so easy that it's one sector you should definitely start with.
You could say it's crazy that you burn gas at 1,500 degrees to make hot water at 90. It's like, seriously? Or steam at 110.
Yeah.
And with the advancements in technology, we can really safely say now that steam at 110, 120 degrees or pressurized water at 120 degrees, the process engineers in this room, they all know how to do that. And they probably wouldn't even care. They would say, okay, if I can't have the gas boiler, put the heat pump there, give me my pressurized water, and I will just run the process. And so from my, really a little bit from my curious mind, I would say we still need to check if we are running the processes not at a too high temperature level. And we had this example, we have cooperated with SEPI, the paper industry, and we started the discussion. The paper engineers, they came in the room and they said, we want 180 degrees, 10 bar steam. The heat pump people sat on the other side of the table and said, sorry, can't do that. So the discussion was over. But we continued the debate. And then after 3-4 years, we brought the same people again to the same table. And there was progress. So out of a sudden we said, well, you still want to have these 180 degrees in 10 bar steam, but we can now do 140. So what if we would put a heat pump and this mechanical vapor recompression together, two-stage process? You can still achieve an efficiency of around slightly below 3, so that's good. If your ratio between gas and electricity is 2, so then you make money, but it's now reliable. And out of a sudden, there was a very, very engaged discussion between everybody, because the paper people hadn't known that this progress had been made, and the other people didn't know, the heat pump people didn't know that you could also have some parts of the paper production process at 140 degrees. So there was this cooperation, the exchange of thoughts, and actually quite some brilliant minds in the room led to solutions. And now we have 5 groups of people that are working in parallel in finding practical implementations at the high end. And if we can decarbonize paper, we can decarbonize everything in these high halls easily.
And
only that maybe paper is less, there's less cultural and branding aspects attached to it. Just still thinking about the whiskey behind me. You know, when you think about the heat burning process, which is part of the branding and of the marketing, of course.
You still do it.
Okay.
But Stefan, I really think there's a communication advantage to start with food and beverage industries. Especially if you want to explain what we are doing here to politicians or just normal people, because in many sectors, as a normal person, you can't really understand which processes they have and where the heat comes from and where it is going. But we all know from home how an oven works and how you can boil your water. And we are very used to electric solutions at home. And we can easily imagine how this can be transferred to a whole production plant.
Yeah.
Of course, it's different there, but it's easier.
Although with the heat pump, I would still need to get used to the idea of having a heat pump in my kitchen.
You have your heat pump in your kitchen? At least.
Well, I have one in the fridge probably. And it took me long to understand how it works. Well, I'm probably trying to play the...
But you know, really, this is something we should stress and stress and stress, this communication aspect. You're really perfectly right.
Yeah.
That bringing the technology into this rather easy to decarbonize sector and then establishing it there and helping people to understand that it works.
Yeah.
I do think that we are really very short of a breakthrough in the whole industry. With the first 10, 15 projects running, and now this whiskey project is really the first of a kind. I've not found another one that is there yet, but I know that the likes of Diageo are discussing now. I had colleagues of mine that visited a factory where you can make these big heat pumps from a ice cream factory. And ice cream, you know, you boil up the milk to decarbonize, not decarbonize, to pasteurize it, and then you cool it down again. So it's perfect. An ice factory should always have a heat pump. That, you know, and this communication works. I would fully jump on that train if we can use that and illustrate it better. Have more like these pictures that people can connect and say, oh, so that also works. Then it will become really easy to change the whole society.
And the thing is, Now we are talking about this really easy to address sector like food. But we are looking forward to a new study by Agora Energiewende and Fraunhofer Easy, which will also be our guests tomorrow. And they looked at the whole temperature range, not only 200 degrees, not only 500, but the whole temperature range. This temperature range where people were thinking, yes, this will be hydrogen anyway. But in fact, in this whole temperature range, you can reduce fossil fuel demand by 90%, even in glass industry, in steel industry, in all these very high temperature industries. So there are solutions for all these also specific processes. The need for fossil fuels and fossil fuel substitutes become very, very low.
We're coming to the last 10 minutes of our chat. We have still not received a glass of whiskey, but that's fine. That's too early in the day, right? But we have an audience, so if anybody wants to ask a question, come in, please say so. We have a microphone which we can hand around. But we have, of course, a lot of further things we can and need to discuss. But now trying to prioritize, I think there is an aspect which I want to get back. It's the economics of it, because having spent myself 15 years in promoting energy efficiency in policymaking, I realized that at the end, the economic argument is the most powerful one. So if we know it does make economic sense, we have all the arguments at place to ask for the infrastructure, for the support, for the policies which are needed to do it. Now it seems we are still, having to prove it. We need the studies. You are saying you do more studies on that to show the economic potential. We also know we have the carbon pricing, which will come in and can be steered. But before I came here, I was reading work from a Brussels-based organization, Smart N. They're part of an electrification alliance, and they promote and speak a lot about demand-side flexibility and flexibility revenues. What are you saying about that? How important is that to make the technologies we're talking here about more economic, faster economic, by basically, if I explain it as giving the opportunity to sell your flexibility in the electricity market, which according to the figures they have shown could mean that already for driving, you're driving for free because the battery in your car is such an important capacity. How could that play out for industry? Could that become a major game changer and just a question of redesigning the market?
The concept is great. We need the modern metering devices in lieu of not talking about a smart meter, because you don't need the super smart device, but you need the connection to the internet and that reads out your demand. And you need a system design that includes storage, and that can also be thermal storage. And then it works really well. So the easiest way is probably the cars, the transport sector. Then comes home use, where you have a small battery or you have a hot water tank or the building core. And industry is probably the most difficult. I don't know if you have experience in that, but what people told me is that they say we are not here to save energy. This is a commodity for us. But first and foremost, we're producing paper. And first and foremost, we're producing pasta and whiskey. And so, of course, maybe for whiskey, you can do the distilling process when the electricity is cheap. But there are continuous processes where you cannot do that. You don't stop the machine, like a plastic production machine. You don't stop because the electricity is too expensive. So this will need a little bit more fine-grained discussion. Maybe it can be solved by having electric batteries on site, and they will help you bridge these 1 hour or 2 hours. But I think it's too fast to say that has huge potential. Let's just use it.
I have a different impression, actually, especially because companies are not going for storing electricity, so in batteries. But the main idea that has become quite interesting for companies is heat storage. So you can store heat up to 1200 centigrades and for over a week. And obviously, with this setup, you can avoid high electricity prices on the market and store the cheap energy in your heat box, however. And this is a really interesting technology for companies that want to electrify their heat. I believe it's more for 1:1 ratio in electrification. So it's not the heat pump solution, but rather you take the kilowatt hour of electricity, store it somehow with the you put it through a resistance element, and then store the heat in the heat storage. And of course, you will have some losses. And it will depend on the individual heat demand of the company, the temperature level they need, and if heat pumps are an option for them, if they rather go for one or the other solution.
But is that, would you think that this is typical today, or is it, because conceptually I've heard about that. But then we again at this point that you go with that idea to the process engineer and say, hey, put the storage in your system, and he says, no, we're not touching my system.
I'd say the reservations are quite on the same level about putting an industrial heat pump in or the heat storage. Yeah. I have sensed high interest in both, but in Germany, because of our comparatively high electricity prices, there are not so many practical examples of this. But they are growing and growing, and it's our task to promote them then, of course.
Yeah, I fully agree.
Okay, so were there any questions or any other points? Otherwise,
well, maybe one thing we should mention here, that we have talked about a lot of temperature levels, but there's very good news out now that that one big heat pump will go to the pharmaceutical company in Vienna, and they will produce heat at 86 degrees centigrade. So we are moving into also.
This is very impressive.
In a practical perspective, we are moving to a level where everybody thought it's not possible just a few months ago.
Yeah.
So the good message could be, anybody that listens to this format, if you are in this game of industrial decarbonization and you have temperature levels that are in these ranges with the 2 and 2 zeros and below that, then you have really good opportunities to decarbonize with electrification, with heat pumps, with steam compression, and with batteries, thermal storage, in a system perspective.
Thank you. That was a very clear message about technology being very hopeful, and the progress is there and visible. What would be your final message before we wrap? I tried to wrap up.
Yeah, I'd say technology is there. We just have to do it. And we have to really make policymakers understand the high potential for decarbonization we have here.
Great, thank you very much. So I have to say I've learned a lot, definitely from the technology side. This is a vast area, and probably its progress, which is ongoing right now, explains also why it hasn't featured much more in the last policy cycle and round. That also said, it means it should be one for the next policy cycle. A message to our politicians, the ones who will take over after the elections this summer, that a clear signal is needed, because that, I think, came out very clear that the signal is confusing. It's about, will the infrastructure be there? What technology is the one we are betting on? What is pushed? There are lots of disturbing noises around different technologies, which can make it difficult for companies to really put their head around, and they get easily lost there.
This is a very interesting and important point, because we expect that the next commission, now we have European elections, the next commission is expected to be more conservative. And the conservative political opinion is often one that works much better when we discuss local jobs and local perspective. And luckily, in this case, we have an industry that is by and large European. So my call to the next Commission President and to the next Commissioner for Energy and Industry would be, let's keep this industry inside Europe. Let's make Europe a powerhouse of industrial decarbonization, because we know how to build the machines. We have the people that can do it. Let's push that further and forward in our Green Deal industrial strategy.
Perfect. It's on record, so we're going to use that, that pitch. To add to that policy signal is also the price signal, a very important aspect, which is a hard one, because talking about increasing carbon prices will not go down well with the competitiveness question. And global markets will be a very big pushback on that, so that's going to be very difficult. But at the same time, there was definitely further thoughts about market design, that the electricity market is still not an optimal market. There is a lot of efficiencies we can get out of it, and storage, which might come along with electrification and heat, industrial heat, can play a very important role there. So looks like a whole mix of things will be needed
Again.
As we know. Is no one silver bullet. Also, nobody knows the outcome of the elections, so we need to be prepared. So great, thank you very much, and well, looking forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you.